Now, before starting, I have to say this. Simply due to the nature of gacha games, where it's more invested in theatrics than an actual showcase of power, there will be a lot of ballparking and educated guesses, a sentiment that will be repeated throughout the entire video. But still, the video will be exciting and well worth your time. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get into the video. So a couple weeks ago, Zenless Zone Zero dropped this fight between Miyabi and Yishuan, and honestly, that fight was insane, just pure hype. But it got me thinking, what would happen if the strongest character in Zenless Zone Zero, Miyabi, went up against the strongest vision holder in Genshin Impact? Like, seriously, is there even anyone in Genshin who could actually stand a chance against her? I mean, Genshin Impact is the game we have the most information on with regards to lore and power, so I thought it would be fun to break this down, analyze both sides, and see who really comes out on top. And trust me, the results might surprise you. If you're into this kind of power scaling, hit the like button and drop your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think wins, Miyabi or Genshin's strongest vision character? And of course, subscribe by hitting the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Alright, let's dive in. Before we jump into the actual fights, let's get some ground rules. First off, a lot of power scaling here is going to rely on very educated guesses. Even though Genshin Impact gives us a decent amount of lore, there aren't many clear, consistent benchmarks for just how powerful vision holders really are. And honestly, it's kind of the same with Miyabi. While we do have more to work with when it comes to her feats, there's still not enough to perfectly quantify her power. So yeah, a lot of what we'll be doing is inference and scaling based on lore and context, not raw numbers. Secondly, we're sticking strictly to lore. That means no gameplay stats, no damage numbers, just what the story, quests, and official material shows us. That goes for both Genshin Impact characters and Miyabi. We're focusing only on what the game has directly shown or told us. Third, we won't be including fan theories or speculations from outside sources. Everything will be based on canon, what's confirmed in games or official materials, no headcanons or leaks involved. And finally, since there are a ton of vision holders in Genshin Impact, some of whom we've only heard about but haven't seen in action, we'll be excluding those characters. So, for example, while the Hexen Zircle seem insanely powerful and probably hold visions, we haven't seen them fight. So the candidate that will represent Genshin will be someone who we have either directly seen in a fight or who we have enough knowledge to safely infer how strong and how skilled they are. And just a quick addition, this video pits Miyabi against vision holders specifically, so characters that don't have a vision will be exempted unless they can be used to explain the strength of characters that do have one. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the actual fight. Alright, let's start with vision holders. Vision holders are basically superpowered individuals scattered across the world of Teyvat, but at their core, they're just that, holders of visions. The game makes it clear that vision holders are normal human beings who've been granted a vision, and the vision is where the bulk of their strength comes from. So what exactly is a vision? Well, visions are jeweled amulets that allow the wielder to channel the power of one of the 7 elements in Teyvat. Those elements are pyro, electro, animal, dendro, hydro, geo, and cryo. In battle, a vision essentially acts like a divine license, unlocking powerful elemental abilities that would otherwise be impossible for a regular human. But it's important to remember, without their visions, most of these characters wouldn't be nearly as strong. It's also really important to understand that the vision alone isn't what makes someone strong. What really matters is how well they've mastered it. The stronger the vision holder, the more skillfully they've learned to channel and control their elements. So really, the strongest vision holder wouldn't just be the one with the flashiest power, it would be the one who have pushed the visions to its absolute limits. And that brings us to the big question. Who exactly is the strongest vision holder we've seen in Genshin Impact so far? So there are a couple of candidates for the title of strongest vision holder in Genshin Impact, and surprisingly, one of those contenders is none other than the Spark Knight herself, Klee. Now, in the recorded history of Mondstadt, only 2 people have ever changed the geographical landscape of the region. The first is the god of Mondstadt himself, Barbados, and the second, Klee. And here's the thing, the Mondstadt we see in the game map doesn't fully reflect the real terrain of the region. If you want a more accurate representation of what Mondstadt actually looks like, you need to check out the map in Varka's office. In that map, there is a section of Cider Lake that appears completely cut off. Now, when you go to that location in game, you'll find a massive rock formation that separates a small part of the lake from the rest. And guess what? That rock exists because of Klee. While on a mission near Stormbearer Mountains, Klee accidentally blew up a part of the mountain, and that chunk of the mountain then crashed into Cider Lake, permanently altering the landscape, flooding the area, and even swallowing part of the surrounding land. So to really grasp how strong Klee is, we've got to break down just how much power it would take to destroy that much of a mountain and cause that kind of geological damage. Alright, so in an earlier video, we estimated that Mondstadt is roughly 14,666 square kilometers in size, and based on that, we can assume that the portion of the region that Klee's blast affected, the area now blocked off by the massive rock inside the lake, is about 1 to 1.5% of Mondstadt total landmass. That puts the affected area at about 150 to 220 square kilometers, give or take. Now here's what's important to understand. Klee didn't just shatter the rock into fragments, she dislodged an enormous chunk of Stormbearer Mountain, a massive intact slab of rock, and that slab fell from the mountain and landed inside the lake, effectively cutting off the section permanently. So to calculate how powerful Klee's explosion really was, we have to figure out how much energy it would take to break off a giant rock of that scale, completely intact, from a mountain cliff all the way to where it landed in the lake. Alright, first let's estimate the size of the rock, and this isn't just a random guess. Since the goal is to block off around 1 to 1.5% of Mondstadt's total landmass, that means we're looking at isolating roughly 150 to 220 square kilometers. Now we're not talking about covering that entire area with rock. Instead, the idea is to block Cider Lake's outlets, cutting off the flow of water into that region. All the lake has to do is stop feeding that downstream zone, and it effectively becomes isolated, hydrologically speaking. So to do that, we need to estimate the size of a rock or barrier large enough to act like a natural dam. Let's assume the lake narrows to a point where the outlet is about 200 meters wide. A realistic dam-like barrier would need to be at least 50 meters high to hold back the water and extend around 500 meters along the shore of valley to create a stable structure. After some calculation, that gives us a volume of 5 million cubic meters. Now, assuming the rock is made of granite, which has a density of about 2700 kilograms per cubic meter, we multiply the volume by the density to get a total mass of approximately 13.5 billion kilograms. So yes, this isn't just a big rock, it's a 13.5 billion kilogram natural dam, sized to completely block off the lake's outlets and cut off a sizable portion of Mondstadt's territory. Now that we have a good estimate of the rock size and mass, let's figure out how much energy it would take for Klee to pull off what she did. Now, there are two main types of energy involved here. First, the fracture energy. That's the energy needed to actually break the rock free from the cliff. And second, the gravitational potential energy. That's the energy needed to make the rock fall down from the cliff to the lake below. The fracture energy is a bit tricky to calculate exactly, but geological studies tell us that granites take between 100 and 500 joules per square meters to fracture. If we estimate the surface area where the rock was attached to the cliff, we can assume the cross-section is about 200 meters wide by 15 meters thick, which comes to 10,000 square meters. Now, using the upper bound of 500 joules per square meter and 10,000 square meters, the fracture energy comes out to about 5 million joules. And honestly, this is tiny compared to the next part, the gravitational potential energy. Now, since we don't know exactly how high Stormbearer Mountain is, let's safely estimate the cliff height at 100 meters. To calculate gravitational potential energy, we use the formula mass times gravity times height. Now, doing the math, we get about 13 trillion joules, or just to put it another way, over 3,100 tons of TNT, meaning Klee expended the same power of about a third of a small tactical nuke to block that outlet. Now, this could very well be an over-exaggeration. Klee might not actually be that strong, but I like to believe, at least in my headcanon, that she really is. After all, she's the daughter of a Hexen Circle Witch, a group whose members include individuals powerful enough to absorb a shade in Genshin Impact, some of the most powerful, potentially planetary level beings in the game. So maybe, just maybe, this isn't as much of an exaggeration as it seems at first. Okay, another contender for the strongest vision holder in Genshin Impact is Kazuha. This mainly comes from his incredible feat of deflecting the Musou no Hitotaki by A, someone we have skilled to be as strong as other gods in the game. That means the Musou no Hitotaki itself is very well a small country level of power. But here's the catch. As many pointed out in my previous video, A didn't go all out with her Musou no Hitotaki because the city of Inazuma was in front of her, so she probably used only a small fraction of his full power, presumably as much as she used on La Signora, meaning enough to vaporize a person, and that limits Kazuha's feats more than I initially thought. And there's one more limitation. To deflect that already limited attack, Kazuha needed not just one but two visions, and from what we've seen, Kazuha's ability to harness two visions was a one-time event. Before and after, no vision holder has shown this kind of power. So while Kazuha is strong, no doubt, I don't think he's the absolute strongest. So let's move on to another contender. Alright, the next contender for strongest vision holder is Arlecchino. Her biggest feat is that she is the 4th Fatui Harbinger, and she outright defeated the Traveler in Genshin Impact. Now, that would sound huge if the Traveler was really strong, but honestly, the Traveler, while powerful enough to beat most foes, isn't really all that strong. Throughout the story, the Traveler usually plays a supporting role in every major fight. Against the Valen, they were a supporter. Against Osayo, same thing. When facing A, the Traveler actually lost the first time, and to get an upper hand in the second battle, they had to rely on some power of friendship plot convenience thing, not to outright defeat A even, but to make her admit defeat. In Sumeru, fighting the Shoko no Kami, the Traveler lost 168 times, and only managed to win by using the collective experience of all of those losses, and even then, the Traveler was supported by Nahida. In the fights against the all-devouring Norwal, Neuvillette carried most of the load with the Traveler supporting. Same thing happened in Natlan, where the Traveler was supported by Mawika and their friends in the Night Kingdom. So while the Traveler is definitely strong, they're not quite god level. And that brings us to the big question. What does that say about Arlecchino? So we know she is the 4th Fatui Harbinger, and we've been told straight up that the first 3 are god level. If we assume those 3 are as strong as Archons, and we already pegged Archons at small country level, then where does that put Arlecchino as the 4th? I think it's safe to say she's at least small to medium city level. Just by being the 4th Harbinger and based on the power she showed, small to medium city level seems like a good estimate. The last contender for strongest vision holder in Genshin Impact is Varka. Now I know we haven't actually seen him, just heard about him, but from what we've heard, we can safely guess how strong he is. For example, we know he crossed swords with Capitano, and we already know how powerful Capitano is. We've been told Capitano is god level, and we've seen him in action against Mawika. In that fight, Capitano lost, but it's important to realize he was severely weakened. His body was eroding, and on top of that, he carried multiple souls inside him, which drained him mentally and physically after 500 years. But even so, he managed to keep up with a fully functioning Mawika, which is insane. So if Capitano is that strong, even weakened, what does that say about Varka's true power? There are still some things we can say about Capitano to figure out Varka's strength. Even severely weakened, Capitano is still the #1 Harbinger, and we've been told the #1 Harbinger has god level power. Now, is Capitano small country level at full power? Honestly, I doubt it, especially considering how drained he was after that fight. But since we've placed Arlecchino at small to medium city level, and Capitano is clearly stronger than her, it's safe to say that Capitano is at least medium to large city level, maybe even close to small country, but not quite there yet. So for Varka, assuming he forced Capitano to a stalemate, then we can place him around medium to large city level as well. So now we have the 4 strongest known vision holders in Genshin Impact: Varka, Arlecchino, Kazuha, and Klee. Now, I know there are other possible candidates like Ganyu and Ninhuang, but the fact is, we just don't know enough about their strength to add them to the list. Now, I think we can safely remove Kazuha and Klee from the list, because out of the 4, Kazuha is arguably the weakest, and Klee, while very strong, is still a child with little battle experience, something that Miyabi has enough of. That leaves us with only 2 contenders, Varka and Arlecchino. Since we've established that Varka could keep up with Capitano, and Arlecchino is clearly weaker than Capitano, we can remove Arlecchino from the running. So it's safe to say that the strongest known vision holder is Varka. To keep it fair, since we don't really know Varka, we can substitute Capitano for him. We're assuming Varka is as strong as Capitano, so using Capitano as a stand-in makes sense. Alright, so now that we've locked in the strongest vision holder in Genshin Impact, it's time to switch gears and look at Zenless Zone Zero. And in ZZZ, we already know who is arguably the strongest character, Hoshimi Miyabi. But the big question is, just how strong is Miyabi? Before we get into numbers or feats, let's break down who Miyabi actually is. So here's where things get really interesting. Unlike Genshin, where vision holders gain elemental powers granted by Celestia, Zenless Zone Zero operates completely differently. In New Eridu, you've got these dangerous spatial anomalies called hollows. They're massive and unpredictable and full of powerful monsters. Now, to deal with them, the city relies on elite combatants called Hollow Raiders. These are not just anyone, they're highly trained, often superhuman individuals who go into the hollows to take on threats most people couldn't even survive. And standing on the very top of that hierarchy is Hoshimi Miyabi. She's not just a regular Hollow Raider, she's the chief of Hollow Special Operations Section 6, and more than that, she's been given the title of Void Hunter, the youngest ever to earn it. Now, being called a Void Hunter isn't just a nickname, it's a title reserved for people who literally shaped the course of the entire world in Zenless Zone Zero. I mean, out of all the people we've seen or heard about, only 8, including Miyabi, have ever held that title, and every one of them has been world-altering in some massive way. So for Miyabi to be the youngest and current holder of the same title, that already says a lot. But titles aside, let's get into what really matters. What has she actually done? What are her feats that back this all up? So the best way to calculate Miyabi's strength would be to analyze the events that led to her being a Void Hunter. You see, at the point, there was a particular hollow called the Argos Hollow, and inside that hollow was a particular monster called Learner. Now, the idea behind this monster was that it had a real core, but it also had multiple fake cores. And if a fake core was destroyed, more fake cores would immediately spawn to take its place. By the time Miyabi came into the scene, there were already so many fake cores that the proposed solution was to destroy a Shiyu pillar, a massive energy source, and use its destruction to collapse the Hollow and destroy Learner entirely. The issue with that plan, however, was that it would cause casualties, to be specific, 208 casualties. So instead of following through with that plan, Miyabi proposed a different solution. Her plan was to enter the Hollow herself and destroy all the cores, every single one, before they had time to replicate again. She asked to be given 5 minutes to complete the entire mission. However, when the time it would take her to even reach the Hollow was calculated, they realized that the travel time alone was 2 minutes. So realistically, she only had 3 minutes to eliminate every single core within the Hollow before it was too late. And somehow she succeeded. So for us to actually gauge Miyabi's strength, we need to break this feat down. Now, there are certain problems with this entire feat, particularly how the game portrays learner multiplication abilities. The issue isn't just about what Miyabi did, but how the mechanics of learner were presented. See, the game implies that Miyabi initially needed 5 minutes to completely eliminate learner, and that immediately brings up some logical inconsistencies. If Miyabi needed 5 minutes, that would suggest that it takes a long time for each core to multiply, but that doesn't really make sense. For learner to be the kind of threat that required blowing up a Shiyu pillar, something that would have killed over 200 people, the rate at which the fake cores multiply had to have been insanely fast. We're not talking about minutes. The regeneration window would need to be at most a couple seconds to make learner unmanageable by normal military forces. And that's where the contradiction lies. If the cores regenerated too slowly, like even 1 per minute, then the enforcers would have absolutely been enough to handle it. They wouldn't have needed someone like Miyabi. But on the flip side, if the cores regenerated in just seconds, let's say 2 or 3 seconds, and Miyabi still needed 3 full minutes to finish the job, then the number of cores she had to destroy would be astronomical. And that's where things start to break down. Let's say when she entered the Hollow, there were already 10,000 active cores, and the cores respawned every few seconds. Then as she was destroying one batch, more were popping up elsewhere. That means she wasn't just cleaning up a set number, she was outpacing a system that was actively multiplying as she moved. If Miyabi had truly done that in just 2 minutes, that would push her power into planetary levels, possibly approaching God tier. And as strong as Miyabi is, we know she isn't a god. That means there has to be a middle ground. Either the rate of core regeneration was lower than it logically had to be for that threat, or there is a narrative inconsistency that we have to factor in. So for this to work, we need to estimate a few things. First, how many cores were present when Miyabi entered? After doing a rough calculation of the Hollow size and volume based on the surrounding buildings, we can reasonably estimate that the Hollow is a hemisphere approximately 1.91 kilometers in diameter, using the nearby skyscrapers for scale. Based on this, if we assume that each core is roughly the size of a basketball, I'd estimate there to be at least 10,000 cores inside. Now, just to be clear, 10,000 cores would make up about 0.003% of the Hollow's total volume. Considering the military was so overwhelmed that they proposed using a Shiyu pillar, something they believe could destroy the entire Hollow just to deal with one monster, it's clear that the actual number of cores could and likely should be much higher. But for the sake of an extremely conservative baseline, we'll stick with 10,000 as the absolute minimum. Next, how durable are the cores? In this case, durability is largely irrelevant since Miyabi uses a cursed sword. With Cellular, she can essentially cut through almost anything, so resistance wouldn't slow her down. Now, Miyabi was given 3 minutes to complete the mission. Let's assume she used 2 minutes in total. Since it's unlikely she spent that full time fighting Learner directly, given Learner's multiplication capabilities, we can infer that most of that time, perhaps a minute and some seconds, was used to eliminate surrounding enemies to create space for the final battle. Learner itself was likely taken down in a matter of seconds, not even a full minute. The key question becomes, how many seconds did it take Miyabi to destroy Learner? And that would depend on how frequently Learner could spawn new cores. Now, we don't know exactly how long it takes for cores to spawn, but what we do know is that cores must spawn within seconds for the threat to make sense. so we have to consider two possible scenarios. In the first scenario, let's say each core spawns every 2 seconds. That would mean Miyabi had just 2 seconds to destroy 10,000 cores. If we assume each core is as durable as a cruise missile, the energy needed per core would be about 100 gigajoules, making the total energy output required 1 petajoule. To estimate her power output, we divide that energy by time. In this case, destroying all cores in 2 seconds would require a power output of 500 terawatts, over 30 times the power usage of Earth. Now, if we convert that energy to destructive force, 1 petajoule equals 240 kilotons of TNT. That means Miyabi would have unleashed the equivalent of about 8 Hiroshima bombs per second. Based on this, Miyabi's power scaling could fall into large city or even mountain level range, depending on how strong the cores truly are. But you see, that's not all. This event also lets us calculate Miyabi's speed. To figure that out, we need to look at both her reaction speed and her strike speed. Now, to get any meaningful numbers, we first have to define a few mechanics. Does she destroy the cores individually or in groups? From the video, we see that each core is taken out with a separate action. There is no AoE or passive damage. So if she had to destroy 10,000 cores within a 2-second window, that means she made 5,000 precise strikes per second. And when it comes to reaction time, locating the core, reacting to it, targeting it and striking, it breaks down to about 200 microseconds per core. That's over 1,200 times faster than the fastest human. Now, if we assume she moves her sword a short distance for each strike, say about 0.5 meters per core, that would put a sword movement at roughly max 7.3 or hypersonic speed. Again, this all hinges on the idea that she destroyed the entirety of Lerner in just 2 seconds. Now, moving on to case 2, which is basically the same as case 1, but this time it takes 30 seconds for each core to spawn. 30 seconds to destroy all the cores. That's the one we're using because it's more reasonable. If we assume each core has the energy of a cruise missile like before, that would mean that Miyabi would expend 16.7 terajoules over 30 seconds. That means her power output would be around 557 gigawatts, about half the output of the entire US electrical grid at that moment. To put it into perspective, 16.7 terajoules of destructive energy could level a city block per second if focused, spread across those 30 seconds, which roughly matches large town to small city level. Now, for strikes per second, to destroy 10,000 cores in 30 seconds, she'd have to land about 333 strikes per second, taking about 3 milliseconds per core. That means Miyabi would need to detect, aim, move, and strike every 3 milliseconds, about 40 times faster than an elite human and 5 times faster than a housefly. Assuming each strike requires her to move her weapon 1.5 meters, over 30 seconds, that's roughly 600 kilometers per hour, about Mach 0.5, which is subsonic, about the speed of a bullet train. But that's not all. We found out that tailless Miyabi's sword grants its wielder power, and while previous owner used this power, Miyabi has only rarely tapped into it. So all the calculations before reflected just Miyabi's own strength. And luckily, we have seen an example of her using tailless's power. In the fight against Bringer, where she landed the final slash to defeat him, she tears through a hollow. Now, for context, hollows are powerful apocalyptic level disasters, dangerous spherical dimensions that warp space and time. Essentially, they're another dimension. So Miyabi tearing through a hollow to see outside is absolutely insane. That puts her way beyond anything we can physically measure, scaling her to planetary or even dimensional level. However, the catch is she can't control this ability yet, but it is definitely a part of her arsenal. So the main question is, who is winning in an all-out fight? Capitano and by extension Varka or Miyabi? Putting the dimension splitting slash aside, I say they're really on equal ground. When it comes to strength, I'd even say Varka might have a slight edge. Now, while Genshin Impact shows plenty of strength, speed examples are surprisingly rare. In fact, the only reason I say Capitano and by extension Varka matches Miyabi's speed is from the Capitano and Marwika fights. Marwika would make what looked like a single slash but was actually multiple slashes, and Capitano could keep up with it. If Varka is as strong as Capitano, then it makes sense that he could keep up with that too. But when you factor in the dimension splitting, it changes everything. With that ability, Miyabi even rivals Archons from Genshin Impact. The only Archon known to split dimensions is A, the Electro Archon. Beyond that, there aren't many who can. So with dimension splitting, Miyabi reaches Archon level. In a fight between Miyabi and the strongest vision holder, it's a clear win for Miyabi. Even without dimension splitting, she still goes toe to toe with the strongest vision holder. Adding that ability just makes it overkill. But what do y'all think? Maybe I'm off somewhere. We did a lot of guesses about both Miyabi and Varka, so if you see something that could be added or changed, drop your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one.